Welcome to LYLAS. If you grew up in the 90s, you probably know what that stands for. And by default, this podcast is for you.
Welcome to episode 43.
Welcome, welcome.
I know, I get so excited every time we say it because it's like it just throws it back into reality that we've been doing this so often. We've been committed. Thanking all of our listeners for sticking with us and for continuing to give us new ideas and motivation along the way.
Yeah, this is another listener suggested topic, one that neither one of us had thought of, but certainly one that I see all the time on social media. So I thought, well, that's kind of perfect. And I do have some thoughts on the topic. So let's dive into it today.
Yeah, popular term. Let's go ahead and just throw it out there. Gaslighting.
Gaslighting, narcissism. You've seen the TikToks. You've seen the Instagram reels. I feel like I can't scroll through one day without seeing something about what to do if you're dating a narcissist or, what to do if you're being gaslit. And so interesting that somebody suggested this topic because I do feel like everybody has fallen into, well, I should say, I feel like all of us have some narcissistic qualities. Yeah. I don't know anybody other than maybe, and I don't know Mother Teresa didn't, but like, unless you're like some sort of like Buddhist monk or priest or something, even everybody has a tendency to want more for themselves or want to receive recognition or to want to be appreciated and loved and feel loved and, or has like deep insecurities. And so we all, have some of these qualities, right?
Yeah, everybody's got an ego. Last time I checked, those things didn't get like deleted from our, kind of sequence of life or personality characteristics. Now, does it get accentuated differently based upon the person? Absolutely. Or the situation even. Sure. But I think you're right. It's definitely, I think as we talk about this, a tone of awareness and caution that is appropriate, perhaps. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's my biggest beef with TikTok. And, it used to be like you're a TikTok doc, those types of things, especially during COVID, but is that we're putting these diagnoses out, right? Narcissism is a personality disorder. And it has to be diagnosed by a professional with the credentials to do so and the training and the background. And people go on TikTok and make reels and they feel very confident in their ability to diagnose individuals with narcissism. And I just think that's super dangerous and something that, sure, we have all done it. We have all said, well, he's acting, bipolar, she's acting bipolar. We've all said things like that, myself included. I'm not saying that I'm above this by any means. I do try to be more mindful of that the older that I get. But, if we really want to remove the stigma around mental health, we've got to stop walking around and diagnosing people with these disorders if you're not credentialed to do so. And I feel strongly about that. And I think that's what frustrates me when you see these constant reels coming up on your social media. The people, it just gives people that what's the word I'm looking for? That privilege. I don't know, that's not the right word, but like,
pretty close.
Like that idea that they have the skills to do that. And without even fully understanding these disorders and what they mean for somebody that might truly be suffering from a personality disorder.
That's true. And I think along those same kind of lines with this, I think that there's been a growing tendency to use psychologically based terms, or even as APA would say, colloquialisms that have become trending words and popular amongst the mainstream, to describe normative types of disagreements or behaviors. And I think that, again, we're probably throwing out some points of caution within this just because we are both mental health professionals and we have both felt so strongly about being protective of the profession and the patients that I think that it serves. And to do that, it does come down to awareness to the words that we're using, making sure, like you said, that we have appropriate people that are doing the diagnosis, the treatment for it, and then not just classifying general things with psychological terms. I don't think that that necessarily helps things much either. You know, just because you got in an argument with your boyfriend and he pissed you off does not mean that you were gaslit for 30 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, let's kind of be real.
Right. Or just because you don't see eye to eye with somebody doesn't mean that they're a narcissist. And or that you had a fallout with somebody, it doesn't mean that they were a narcissist and you just didn't pick up on the behaviors all along. You know, certainly they might have exhibited some behaviors, as we all do at certain points in life, but not enough to just outright label them this or that. And it's interesting because people feel so confident to do that with mental health disorders. We don't walk around saying to people like, "Oh, you have a headache. I think you have brain cancer." Like you would never say that to somebody, right?
Right.
If somebody's like, "I got a headache," you're like, "Are you dehydrated?" Like, let's, but people feel so confident. And to me, they're sort of similar in that, like, you're giving a major diagnosis to someone if you say, "Oh, I think have you been checked for cancer?" Versus like, "Oh, I think that person has narcissistic personality disorder." Like, it just, to me, these are such heavy diagnoses that no one would throw that around. The cancer, nobody would throw that around as easily as we do mental health disorders, bipolar. That used to be a big one. It was like, "Oh, she's bipolar," and people still do throw that around. But it's just interesting to me that people feel so comfortable labeling mental health disorders, but we don't do that necessarily with medical disorders or diagnoses.
Absolutely. And we offer more compassion, I think, too, whenever it comes down to medical disorders, Um, and I think that that is not the case for the great majority of, mental health based kind of conditions. And so, again, it's not, I don't know how much we're helping if we're not opening up our arms with compassion and a little bit of understanding and true facts about something, and using that as grounding as opposed to, again, using social media or common terms to what we think diagnose somebody. And again, you can say that a person is a gaslighter. What you're doing is you're describing a set of behaviors that a person is exhibiting that are affecting potentially you or other people. You can even see, like, whenever we were kind of reading through some of this stuff, you can be a self-gaslighter. Like, are you doing this to yourself? But really, I don't even think that's the appropriate term. You know what you're doing? You're sending yourself negative messages. That's negative self-talk. Do we have to use the term gaslit for that? No, we're just adding another negative on top of it. What I will say, though, is that if you are a person who is questioning the relationship that you are in, and you or others are using terms like being gaslit or, a narcissist, then I would maybe encourage talking to someone about the overall healthiness of the relationship. Because if you're thinking about that, it's probably not working out, and you might 100% too be right, and it's an unsafe situation. And so then we've now moved into a different realm of abuse. We've now learned into a different realm of domestic violence, which again are completely different than what we're seeing, I think, broadcast on social media.
And this is not to knock social media, because I'm a pretty big fan of social media. I think it has a lot of positives and that it can bring people together. I like, there's funny stuff on there. It's a way to keep up and stay connected to people that you wouldn't necessarily stay connected to. And so I think it has so many positives. It's just like, I feel like lately my feed has just been over and over again talking about narcissism and personality disorders and gaslighting and how to recognize this if you're in a relationship. And it's like, okay, well, it's sort of like just a natural defense mechanism. When someone hurts you, you want to call out that wrong, right? You want
Mm-hmm.
to you're not just going to say, oh, they hurt me. You want to say, well, they were, I spent years being gaslit or whatever. You want to call it something, give it a name, so that you
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily have to be super descriptive and tell the ins and outs of everything that happened. When in reality, when somebody hurts you, like, yeah, it's you were hurt, but that doesn't mean that they were gaslighting or that they were a narcissist. And it instantly puts you in like this really like weak and ooh, poor me sort of situation, where in reality, if somebody hurt you, like, okay, that yes, that might have happened, but let's talk about what was the big picture, and
Right.
what did you contribute to that? Because we all play a part in any
Mm-hmm.
sort of fallout or heartbreak or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We all have to accept our part of, or responsibility of that relationship.
Absolutely. And again, this still differs from if you find yourself in an unhealthy relationship, we're not victim blaming on you for staying in an unhealthy relationship. We
Right.
understand the difficulties and the challenges that are associated with that process, and that the type of behaviors that we're talking about are absolutely a part of it. But to use it as a common term or descriptor for normative behavior disagreements, I think is where there's got to be some type of like line drawn.
I think it's more important to look at the total, like you're saying, like look at the big picture here. And
Mm-hmm.
is this in general a healthy relationship? Because chances are, if you're already thinking about words like gaslit or narcissism in relation to like a specific person or a relationship, like chances are that's not a super healthy relationship.
Right, right. And that again is a good sign for maybe again to talk to somebody, to come up with a safety plan, to call a local. And I know I go off the rails with this stuff, but this is my old professional life coming back through, get in touch with the domestic violence shelter, whatever you need to do in order to kind of get a plan up and going with things. And again, make sure that you are taking care of yourself, your family in that process. But if we're just talking about a common term, I think it's important that we maybe use the old school words. Like, can't we just go back to calling somebody an asshole?
Right. He's just an ass. Like I say that probably more frequently than I should. I'm like, don't be an ass or,
Yeah.
but I think I read somewhere it's like less than 5% of the population is actually diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. And with the amount of things that you see right now coming out about, that it would lead you to believe that like at least a quarter of the population's narcissist,
Oh,
just
half.
because
Yeah.
it's so prevalent right now. But when you really step back, you're like, oh, that's actually not all that. Like to actually meet all of the criteria to receive that diagnosis is kind of difficult. And it's
Super
like
tough.
anything that, mental health disorders are often not standalone. They're often comorbid with some other type of disorder. And so without having, extensive education in psychopathology, I don't know that any of us should be walking around and just, throwing these terms out or making TikTok trends or whatever. Because it is, it just sort of like it starts to build. And now all of a sudden that's all, well, this person's a narcissist. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people have said that recently. They're like, oh, my ex, he was a narcissist. I'm like, really? Was he? He was one of the 5% in the population that actually had that diagnosis. Was it? Yeah, or whatever it is. But you're just like, okay. Um, I don't know. It takes like that a little bit of credibility away in some ways
It does.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
when we're just walking around diagnosing people.
Mm-hmm. Totally does. And I mean, to go back to definitions of things, gaslighting as its main term, it was first like a play, then Alfred Hitchcock did a movie on this. And then,
Really?
yeah, yeah. And then all of a sudden, and you remember if you watch, we used to have to watch Alfred Hitchcock movies in one of my psychology classes. It was really weird. Um, but it was totally appropriate because everything that he did had this like very psychological base to it. There were psychological thrillers like The Godfather of them, and so
Mm-hmm.
it made it very interesting from that kind of a class to have. Um, but this is a person who, manipulation is the number one key thing or behavior that they're displaying. And whenever someone is being gaslit, and again, I don't even think we need to go in definitions of this because everybody sees it all the time, but they're making you question your sense of reality, worth, and well-being. Okay, those are still things that are part of an unhealthy relationship.
Correct. Correct. And haven't we all known somebody that treats people that way? And or you've witnessed it or you've been on the receiving end of that? I mean, I personally don't know anybody that has never, experienced that on some level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they make you feel crazy. They make you feel like that your emotions aren't valid or rational, or that everyone else is also talking behind your back or thinking that you're crazy. I mean, they use words to kind of, again, isolate, to degrade, demean, devalue, all of those types of qualifiers. And it still goes back to it being an unhealthy relationship. So if you are questioning this, then the answer is probably yes, you are in a pretty bad situation. And now we need to work on getting a plan or a way out. Or if this is a friend, then talking with them, hey, this is not sounding good. We don't have to use other terms for it. We need to do maybe something about the process.
Yeah, or stepping back into your power. And I think that's something that as
Mm-hmm.
women, we all could benefit from, whether it's a friendship of just creating that boundary of, I'm not going to let you talk to me this way. I'm not going to let you uh, not acknowledge my feelings. I'm not, like that,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't work for me anymore. And so, if this is the end of our friendship, that's the end of our friendship. But these behaviors are not acceptable to me anymore. And really stepping into like, not, hey, can you stop doing that? That makes me feel uncomfortable. And more from the side of like, no, I'm just actually not going to let you do that. So if
Mm-hmm.
you do that, like, we're probably not going to see each other anymore.
Yeah, I
And I
love
think
what you said.
there's so much power in taking that back. Now, my question for you, since you always have a good answer for me, you're my personal therapist here. What if it's because I've experienced it more in the workplace?
Mm-hmm.
So what if it's like your boss? How would you, and let's say like you're under a contract and you're stuck in that position for the next year, like how would you sort of um, coach someone to work in that sort of environment where you have somebody that is constantly, using those sort of manipulation tactics?
This is where I'm going to, at first, I would review your contract, because even though the first thing we think of a contract is that it's binding for a year, whenever it's actually not. There are many clauses within every single contract that allow both parties to escape from it. It is not possible in the United States to be somebody's slave. Okay.
Yeah.
Period. And so let's just again say that. And so all contracts have clauses for you to be able to escape from. One of them is a hostile work environment, which you don't have to kind of stay within. And so if you have deemed that you are working within a hostile work environment, every single place, literally within the United States, is also required to have, its own kind of steps and procedures in order for you to be able to get out of that. Now, could that be tainted as well? Could it be like a big brother watching over and everything else? Yes, it could. But there's also a process that's an option to go through. So we need to think about options whenever we feel like we're being stuck into a hole. So one, I'd always go back and look at a contract. No one is a slave within the United States from a actual employed position. Okay. You can go and follow a general chain of command as another option. And then I think as a third, this kind of comes back to almost what we were talking about last week in a different realm. Really looking at what the job is doing to us from a values perspective, from a health perspective, from a family perspective. How is this hurting more things than just me? Because if you are in any type of environment or relationship and to find that it is causing you consistent pain and distress, that, going to your example of cancer, is a cancerous tumor that can 100% be removed. Is it going to be challenging, difficult, and it's going to have a recovery process thereafter? Yes. And does it still need removed? Yes. And so that might mean that you are switching jobs or that you're looking for other opportunities. This doesn't mean that a door is shut. It means that we have to look for all the windows that are open, you know, and kind of in order to get out of it. And so, I mean, those are definitely coachable things that you can work through with somebody to find out what's the best possible option. But no, there's always ways out. You know, we might have to, yeah, there might have to be creative, rely on support from other people. We might have to pivot our life a little bit into a different direction. And that might mean, you know, maybe taking a job and getting less money. But every single person that I have talked to that has ever pivoted away from that, the life that they have gained from it has been significant in terms of what they were losing by staying there. And so even there's been greater strains on money. You can work with lenders, you can work with credit cards. There's options that can happen. So we really have to go into like brainstorming, creative thinking, like writing it all down so we can see, choosing the best option and then going with it. And that's even the same thing I would say if you're leaving a partner or leaving an abusive situation. We're going to have to pivot everything. And yes, there's losses, there's going to be hardships, there's going to be a lot that comes with it. And it still needs to be done in order to get to that next place. But that's where I think working with somebody, a professional on these types of matters, can be so assistive. And I've seen it personally for years, the benefits that kind of come from that. So,
yeah, I mean, in every valley, there's always a peak right after that. I can attest my whole life, anything extremely difficult that I've gone through, there's always been something so amazing on the other side if you can just get through that. And sometimes you can get through that with your support system that you naturally have in place. Sometimes you do need to reach out to a professional. But like you said, you know, the stress that these types of behaviors can cause on a person, eventually your body's going to force you to take action because something's going to surface that you can't ignore. And that could be mental health issues, that could be physical health issues. I mean, we know that stress has, you know, a tremendous impact on our functioning. And so I think it's important to recognize if you are finding yourself in these types of relationships or experiencing these types of behaviors from another person that you're interacting with on a daily basis, that to really take a hard look at what's the impact that this is having on me, and is it worth it? Is it truly worth your mental health, your physical health, all of the things that you're experiencing? And most likely you're going to say no. And then how do you pivot? How do you start to make those changes? Because unfortunately, most of the time you just need a complete change of environment and to get away from that person. Maybe you're just not compatible people. Maybe you just aren't ever going to see eye to eye. Maybe you have a different set of values. Like there are so many things versus just calling that person a narcissist and being like, well, they were just a narcissist. Like, what are you going to do? You know, you really need to recognize, okay, this is unhealthy. It's impacting me and I need to figure out a solution for myself. And then pivot. And it's like, it's hard. It's like anything. If it was hard or if it was easy, everybody would do it, you know?
yeah.
But it's the tough stuff that really gets you into like the amazing peaks that are right around the corner. I think that's something I always hold on to when I'm going through something really difficult. Is just knowing that you've got something really amazing waiting on the other side of this.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're sitting there questioning whether you're going crazy or not, then I'm pretty sure you're not by default. You know, we might just want to kind of turn into our inner voice, our gut, our intuition that's sitting there saying, you know what, this situation's crazy, but that doesn't mean that
you're crazy.
I am, or potentially maybe the other person is, but the situation absolutely is. And now it's time to kind of pivot. So let's play ball and empower ourselves in order to be a player and the game to change.
Yeah, you make a good point. Sometimes it's just the combination of two people. Like both people can be perfectly sane and healthy, but you put them together and it can be explosive. And so, like I said, a lot of times it's just recognizing that. And then how do you pivot in life, in your career, in your relationship, whatever it is?
Yeah, and I mean, we can go down a whole rabbit hole with this. Like, then people can worry about, well, what are they going to say to the kids? How's this going to change relationships? What's going to, I can't protect the kids from him or her. This is an unhealthy relationship for everyone at that point. You're not protecting anybody by asking how to protect them.
Yeah.
It's time to go.
Yep. Start a new chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe not the direction that people would think that we'd take with this one, but hey, it is what it is.
Yeah. I keep going back to it because I think about it. It's like you can always, like you said, you can always pivot. You can always find something else. And it's something I wish I would have acknowledged more when in like my 20s. It's unfortunate that it takes, almost 40 years for you to figure out that there's always another option out there. And I think that's maybe hopefully something that we bring to this podcast is just exposing people to options and exposing people to the idea of options, because we get so stuck in our routine and our daily life, and you're like, this is how it is, this is what I'm supposed to do, this is my path. And that's all fine and well if you're happy, but if you're not, look for different paths. Find a different route. Do what you have to do to seek happiness. But that's something that I can honestly say I did not discover until almost 40 years old.
Yeah, which is fair. We're all on our own journey with things. But if you're noticing, again, like if you're questioning whether you should be in something, my guess is that you probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
So job, relationship, I don't know, almost anything. I think for me, that's an inner red flag kind of going off that we need to maybe reassess to make sure that we're collecting all the information that's needed, and then to, again, formulate some type of plan to pivot. So,
Yep.
That's what we got.
So true. So true. Life's too short to deal with assholes.
100%. And can we please just bring back words like that? Like, when did it become when did it become like a bad word to call somebody a shithead? I mean, we're using like gaslit like it's not a bad word. No, I think it's actually worse. Like, I just want to sit there and call you a dick. You know what I mean? And you can call me a bitch, and that's fine, but can we just not use like these clinically based terms? Can we just go back to just people being shitty? I mean, maybe.
Right. Let's bring back those words. That's really the goal of this podcast, is start calling people assholes and shitheads.
Right. I'd rather get called that than a narcissist or a manipulator or a bit. You know what I mean?
I'm going to work on a TikTok. Not that I know what I'm doing on TikTok. I'm going to work on something that relays this message, because that right there is
it's gold.
Maybe the best thing we've ever said on this podcast.
It's gold.
Bring it back.
I don't know. I mean, we're using words to describe a person's behavior, right? I mean, that's at the end of the day, we're using words to describe a person's set of behaviors, maybe.
Yeah. Not who they are, but how they act.
Yeah, you're acting like a shithead.
Right.
I mean,
don't be a dick.
Right. I mean, we used to say that all the time, and I don't remember people getting, I don't know. It just didn't have so much of a heavy weight to it. We knew that person was that way, and so we just stayed away from them, or we broke up with them, or other stuff happened. We didn't just sit there and like go down this whole clinical path and use a bunch of psychobabble in order just to throw it out there on like a wall like graffiti and let it stick. That's not okay.
When you start using these disorders, it gives more weight to it. So if you're trying to convey the message, this person's like a giant dickhead or a ginormous asshole, it obviously carries more weight to be like, oh, they're bipolar or they're narcissistic or whatever. But again, like you are contributing to the stigma of mental health disorders versus just saying like, hey, he's a real giant asshole. And that's why he's no longer in my life because I have no room for extra assholes.
Right. And I get that you might be trying to broadcast your own PSA warning on this stuff, but I think that we do that stuff thinking that we're helping to save people, when again, I don't know that that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
I don't.
Yeah.
We're taking it out of we're putting it in a different arena.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, that's all I got for today.
That's it. We're done.
We're all done with this topic. I'm going to delete everything that shows up on my social media. There's even like a glimmer of those two words. It's instantly, I'm going to start reporting it.
Out. Out. We're not bringing that in our
Do
life.
not want to see this content.
No. And you know what? We're going to empower. That's what
right. I do want to see content of you calling somebody an asshole.
That's fine.
Or saying, hey, this guy was a big old ass today, and let me tell you why. Or this person is doing these things. But the other, again, go back to the tips that Sarah shared. She's always got great tips on what to do if you find yourself in these terrible relationships, and start to make your plan to pivot.
Yeah, it always usually starts with get out.
Get out. Start there, your exit strategy.
Yes, it's
your
always
Irish
possible.
Goodbye.
Right.
Ghost them, as the kids are saying these days.
Right. That's also I mean, there's anytime you feel trapped, you're trapping yourself in an obstacle that's keeping you from seeing openings. And we're always looking for open doors, but hell, windows work too. Cracks work. You know what I mean? There's always an opportunity. So
Step into your
it's
power.
breaking out. Yeah, step it out.
Don't give it away. All right, ladies and gents. Until next week, LYLAS.